The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to this LavaCon webinar presented by Michael Priestley. Michael, are you ready?
I believe I am.
It's all yours.
All right, thanks everyone for coming out. So I'm going to talk about agile development of content and cognitive delivery of content, marketing content as the case is. And it's all based around taxonomy. So hopefully, I know I've got at least a few people here today who have not been scared off by that term. So thanks for that. So a little bit about me. I'm the product owner for a team doing taxonomy development and working with technology around taxonomies, and leading a guild of basically product owners and content stakeholders across different parts of the marketing ecosystem, so tools, services, and authoring communities. So in the past, I've also worked in documentation, support, training, as well as marketing content with a sort of general scope of enterprise content technology strategy, but I'm really focused on taxonomy and taxonomy technology or ontology technology today. In the past, I've also been heavily involved in a standard called DITA, Darwin Information Typing Standard, and I'm still involved in that in the form of a co-chair for a subcommittee on a sort of flavor of the standard called lightweight data that is potentially of applicability, potentially has some applicability to marketing scenarios, but it's not really the subject of the talk today. So first off, why do we care about taxonomies? And there's really sort of three major use cases that I'm going to be talking about today. There's first off, just being able to make better content. So make better content decisions, learn from what other people are doing, being able to measure not just how my piece of content did sort of on a website or in terms of user engagement, but how kinds of content perform. And not just a category of content, but even combinations of categories, like what topics are of interest to particular industries, what preferences do they have for a particular format or type of content in what sequence. So these combinations and categories are sort of generalizations that we can draw from the performance of the content, but they depend upon a consistent classification that we can then use as the basis for that generalization. And then a next benefit, less ways to confusion. Once we know about those, about the content that exists, and we are able to think of it in terms of buckets or classifications or categories, we can start seeing what content already exists that has the same classification as the content I'm about to create or deploy, and make sure that what I'm creating is suitably different and is going to appear as different and have a logical distinction from the audience's point of view. And if it really is identical or close to identical in terms of purpose and format and audience and topic, then maybe you shouldn't create that at all. You should reuse it. And there's a whole bunch of benefits to that, including the fact that you're no longer competing for the same sort of place in the sort of the keyword space and search rank. And then finally, driving experience. So being able to do what I've called cognitive delivery. And so in using the taxonomy and some intelligent tooling around the taxonomy to drive navigation, sort of, if you can think of it as navigation is sort of, what's similar, what should I go to, what should I go to that's related to what I'm currently reading. Progression is what's the next thing I'm likely to be interested in based on what I've read before. And then personalization, making it personal to my journey, not just my current location. And if we think of the first two buckets are really around, if we can get them working, they're around around agile development. The last bucket is around the cognitive delivery. So again, agile development, if we think of it, basically what we're trying to do is give customers what they want. That's your basic mission. And that means answering three core questions. What do they want? Do we have it? Did it work? So in terms of life cycle, you're going to be asking the question, what do they want when you're planning? You're going to be asking, do we have it before you create it as part of the management step? And then you're going to publish it, and then you're going to measure, did it work or not? And the results of that measurement, you're going to want to feed back into your next planning stage. And the faster you can complete this cycle, and the faster you can get that feedback, the more agile you can be, and the more quickly you can respond to your actual audience needs and refine your models, refine your measurements, refine your plans. So this is all in the service of those first two goals: better content and less waste and confusion. And the biggest challenge here is actually that consistent tagging. If we want to say, what do they want? That's a sort of our model of the audience and its relationship with topics and sort of the user journey that they're going to be on. And ultimately, that depends on metrics. Do we want that model to be based on actual measurements of what people do express interest in and in what order? We also, but that metric in turn depends on tagging. So the metrics also informs the did it work question. The tagging also informs the do we have it question. So to answer those three questions, we need a model and metrics and tagging. The model depends on the metrics depends on the tagging, but who's going to do that tagging and who benefits from the tagging? And historically, this has been where a lot of taxonomy-based efforts have simply failed, because when people tag their content, it's an effort. And if it's an effort that is going to help someone else downstream do some kind of analysis that applies across multiple people's content, but it doesn't come right back to bear on the person doing the tagging and benefit them directly, there's not a lot of incentive for them to do it carefully and to get it right. And for them to do it carefully and get it right means training. It means sort of making sure that whoever's doing the tagging has gotten appropriate sort of updated training as the taxonomies evolve. It's a huge effort, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you need to recognize that effort and ideally find ways to minimize it. And so one of the big ways that we tried to sort of resolve that problem was introduce a tagging service. And that gives us a then cycle of dependencies, which can be bad, but if you can kickstart it, it starts working and working really well. So now we've got a model that depends on metrics, that depends on tagging, that depends on a tagging service, that depends on the model. So the tagging service, once you've got that model that says topics and audiences and keywords are all related in this relationship, we can start running that service against pages that it's never encountered before, and it can tell you with a reasonable degree of accuracy what the page is about and how that matches to a subject taxonomy or topic taxonomy, and then make deductions from there to tell you what potential audiences it has and how it might relate to sort of other sort of facets of your taxonomy. But to kickstart this cycle, it basically means hand building a model and training your tagging service, and then starting that cycle where you start getting feedback and evolving the model and evolving the tagging service and increasing your accuracy over time. So looking at a higher level, so that was sort of a technology focus and why we're creating some technology around the tagging service to resolve a bottleneck. But at a higher level, there's actually sort of three major challenges or kinds of requirements that we need to deal with. On the people front, if you want to be getting people publishing content that is sort of customer centric, is thinking about customer needs first, looking for learning from other people's lessons and other people's experiences in other parts of the organization, learning to share content where it's similar across organizational boundaries, and caring about what your customers' experience is, regardless of where they're encountering that content. That means a cultural shift within the organization, from being around the organization or silo that's creating the content to being around who your audience is and looking at where they're getting their content and making sure you align to their needs instead of asking people to guess who might be providing the content they're looking for today. In order to make that culture stick, you're going to need governance across the tools that your different marketing people and other authors are using, and across the different authoring communities. And then to sort of get around that bottleneck of that people have around creating that tagging and getting that cycle going. Cognitive tagging for quality assurance and content coverage. So you've got a tagging service that can identify all the content that is part of your ecosystem that is relevant to a particular audience or a particular marketing campaign or initiative, as well as ontologies that sort of relate. Here's a list of topics, here's a list of audiences, here's how a particular audience, here are the topics that matter to a particular audience or the potential audiences for a particular topic, and so forth. So that was all on the Agile development front. Looking at that last bucket of goal, we had driving customer experience, navigation progression, and so forth. That's getting into a cognitive delivery requirement. And it's the same goal of giving customers what they want, but now it's not about developing the content that customers want and finding out if it worked. It's about looking at what you've currently got on the glass and finding the most appropriate fit for where the customer is at that moment in time. So the first thing you need is customer awareness. Who is actually looking at this page or using your site, and what do they want? And then do we have it? That means content awareness. What content do we have available that's tagged that we can match the tags on that content to the interests and behavior of the customer? And then did it work? Measures of success, and then a plan to improve your selections and models going to the next time they look at content. So if we look at how taxonomies actually drive the experience, I mentioned earlier, there's navigation, which is, I'm thinking of that as mostly answering questions about what's similar. So given where you are, what else are you likely to be interested in on the same topic? And then progression, okay, if you've read this, what's the next, or viewed this, what's the next thing you're likely to be interested in? So the one is sort of parallel, the next is progression, and then personalization, sort of really combining those two and saying, based on what we know about you as an individual, what can we suggest as your next, your next experience? And now I'm drawing this example from a project that I led a year and a half ago now, called Think Marketing. And this was really a pilot project for some of the taxonomy centric delivery that we're now sort of trying to drive more broadly across IBM. And I just want to call out a few of the different features here. So you can see there's a topics pull down up along the top. And actually one of the topics is that we wanted to highlight at the time is called out separately. But if people clicked on customer engagement or selected from the topic menu, they would get a page here that showed only cards that represented content around those topics. And we also had sort of these sort of offers or promotions that were specific to the selected topic, and a lead space that would, as well as individual content below that was sort of constantly refreshed, and multiple pieces of content getting published every single day. And then we also had, you'll see it's advertising across the top, a customize your experience and follow your interests. You could actually create a custom view that was sort of, your own personal homepage, if you will, that tracked specific topics that were of interest to you. And we were working on connecting the newsletter to that. So basically you would get a customized newsletter that matched your personal homepage as well. And then once you were in a page, you could see some of the topics that it was tagged with, data analytics and web analytics. And I should add, for this pilot project, all the tagging was being done manually by authors. And we went through a lot of pain on that. We had some heroic authors, but so it is possible to do this with manual tagging. It's just a lot more error prone, and you need a lot more checks in the system. The cognitive service is really a way to streamline that and lower your risk and make your authors a little more sane, protect their sanity. And then we had a recommended by Watson. This really was using some cognitive technology that was guided by taxonomies to recommend potential next steps. In this case, a product offer they might be interested in, as well as a set of related articles that was based on a combination of a Watson evaluation of relationships within a bucket that was defined by the taxonomy. So we were sort of ratcheting it down to what kinds of content were similar. And I didn't bother screen capturing, but at the end of the page, you've got a call to action. And that we were also working on driving as cognitive. So we had a service that would return the most relevant offer that we wanted people to be going to based on the taxonomic classification of the current article. And we were then connecting that. Our goal was to connect that to the customer experience of that, sorry, to the browsing history and personal interests of the individual users. So they would be getting an individual or personal CTA. We didn't get to do that before the pilot finished, but it was definitely part of the goal. So reviewing in terms of that, categorization. For navigation, we had recommended articles and topic pages that were populated based on taxonomic tagging. For progression, we had the recommended products, so a new content type that we wanted to suggest as the next step, and a dynamic CTA that would match that as well, or at least that was the goal. We did have the recommended products, we didn't have the dynamic CTA. And then for personalization, we had the customized topics page. We wanted to get to a personalized newsletter that would match that, and we wanted to get to a personalized CTA as well. And if you think of this in terms of a user flow, I'm realizing I'm moving much too quickly through these charts, so I'm afraid we're going to have a lot of time for Q&A. I apologize for that. I hope people have some good questions. So we've got a content page that, so if someone finds this via search, for example, they follow it, they get to they go to another page that was recommended to them based on that page. They go from there to an index page that shows them other pages on the same topic. From that page, they follow a call to action on the index page to an event that is really sort of a next thing to go to. They register for the event, and that gets them into the personalized experience. We can start personalizing what pages we recommend, giving them a personal newsletter, and then at an appropriate time, recognizing that they're at a point in the journey where they're really ready for a consultation, for example, about a topic that they've expressed repeated interest into, and we know that they're at a mature enough stage to really be ready to talk to someone about a next step. So the requirements for cognitive delivery, first off, is having common customer data. So being able to tell just what other pages they visited on our site, and having common content metadata and ontologies across the different delivery systems, and common linking components. So, within that pilot site, it was relatively easy because we controlled every component. But one of the challenges was that, of course, a real customer journey isn't going to be limited to a single part of IBM.com. They're going to be bouncing all around. And so part of our big challenge is getting to the point where we can connect this experience and connect the recommendations across a much larger set of content and content types and content sources. And part of that as well is having then a common process for improvement and common KPIs. One of the challenges is if you've got one group that is measuring engagement purely in click-through, and another one that's measuring engagement purely on consumption, they will look at the same piece of content and gauge its success in completely different ways. One will think it's a complete failure, the other one will think it's a complete success. So you need to have a common agreement on what success means, even to just agree on what content to promote and make use of. Another sort of lesson that we used here, because I've been talking about cognitive delivery, I've been talking about dynamic linking, and I want to make sure that that's not at the expense of static or hand-authored links. The nice thing about dynamic links, they're always fresh and relevant, whereas static links can grow stale. Mike Morana, who I highly recommend as a sort of an expert on search and other issues, I think he described it as a hand-authored link is going to be right once and then wrong forever once it breaks or grows obsolete. Dynamic link, it may occasionally get it wrong, but it's always going to be mostly right. So again, it's a question of if the lifespan of the page with the link is only going to be a week or two, then it doesn't matter. You can hand off the links. But if that page is going to be around for a while and it's going to build up some SEO and it's going to be a destination page for a while, then introducing dynamic linking makes sure that it's always going to be guiding people to a next stage that is actually relevant to their interests and relevant to current technology and current opportunities within the website. So dynamic is great for that sort of awareness of opportunity and site discovery, but it is poor for SEO. Google, if that service that brings up the dynamic link is just a little slow, Google is going to give up on it very rapidly. If it keeps changing, Google is going to not deduce a relationship between the two pages because it can't tell what the other page is reliably. So if you complement your dynamic linking with static linking, then you use the static linking for the stable links like site navigation or links to evergreen content. By that I mean, sort of solid, like what is explainers for a technology that's around for a while that you're anchoring other content to. Then those anchor links can help boost sort of signal for that evergreen content, as well as establishing a clear relationship from Google or other search engines perspective between the page that you're publishing and the other page. So it helps them be aware of what other kinds of topics you think are relevant to the page that you're publishing. So static is static links, if you're using them to effectively provide navigation for core taxonomic relationships, like you've got a topic anchor for what is relative to that you put on every page that is relevant to that topic, that can really help boost your signal and build your search rank for all of the related topics in your web. On the flip side, you don't want to ignore the opportunity for dynamic linking, or unless it's a completely static site that you're publishing and then walking away from. So having dynamic links for site discovery, for time-sensitive content like news or events, and especially for personalization. Have that general purpose navigation and linking perspective that Google can understand and build its understanding of your website at an abstract level, but then the personalization to help connect people to the content that matters to them most, hang that on top of the bones that the static links provide. So I've been talking a lot about topics as a taxonomy, and that really that's one of the anchors of our strategy. But I do want to mention the other ones that are sort of part of the picture. So content type is a big one. What is the purpose of the content? Does it explain a concept, express an opinion, describe a case study? So really, hopefully a content type is describing what's interesting about the content from a user point of view, not from an author point of view. So an explainer of a concept or an opinion piece or a point of view or a case study, all examples of a content type. Content format is how the content is expressed. And it might be a web page, or it might be a downloadable PDF or a video animation that people access or download or view on the web. And so you could have the same content type provided in multiple different ways. You might have an interview, for example, that is available as a web page transcription or a blog post. The same interview might be available as a podcast or as a video. So, but it's all an interview. And in actual fact, it's actually the same interview. It's just you're providing access to it in different ways. And then there's topic, which we've talked a lot about. What is the content about? So topics like blockchain or data science or cloud computing could be a business topic, could be a technology topic for IBM content. And then there's the audience or role for which the content is intended. So who is the content for? It might be a data scientist, might be a CFO or a doctor. And then industry. What industries is the content relevant to, like aerospace or energy? And what product is it potentially tied to? Because not every piece of content is going to tie directly to a product, but when it does, you want to know. So Watson Healthcare or whatever the product is. And finally, buyer stage. For a given audience and a given piece of content, how does this fit in? And one of the, is this content that's going to support a learn stage of the buyer cycle for this audience, or a try stage, etc. And then one of the interesting things we're doing is building relationships between these taxonomies, and that's what makes it an ontology, is being able to say, this audience is interested in this topic for this buyer stage. And so effectively that allows you to say, here is a sequence of topics that is a logical sequence for a particular role as they go through their customer journey from a high level topic to a particular product. And finally, and again, I apologize, this finished a lot. I always talk faster on the actual thing. This was slower when I rehearsed it. But for further reading, there was a workshop that I gave with James Matthewson and Dan Segal earlier this year, and it goes into a lot more technical detail, a little less planning and strategy, but a lot more detail. And you can find that on SlideShare, courtesy of Dan. I'd also recommend James Matthewson's book on outside-in marketing, using big data to guide your content marketing. That's a lot of the thinking behind the principles here of using outside-in sort of search results to guide your creation of a topic taxonomy, for example, and understanding how keyword research should affect your content investment. So that's easily available if you just Google it. And finally, just a plug. I'll be presenting on something that is not the same, but has a few tenuous relationships, looking at cross-format and cross-silo content using lightweight data, which is that emerging standard for intelligent content that I mentioned at the start in my bio. And I'll be presenting on that and talking about potentially some of the scenarios for marketing and other professions and use cases at the LavaCon conference next month. So that is it. So again, I talked a lot faster, and I probably glossed over some things I should have gone deeper on. But the good news is that means we've got lots of time for question and answers if there are any.
I actually have two for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any suggestions on how to develop your taxonomy?
Yes. I guess actually the first question is which taxonomy? The topic taxonomy or one of the other ones, or just in general?
Haley, if you could answer that in the chat. While we wait for her, the second question was, could you elaborate on what you mean by tagging service?
Absolutely. So we developed basically it's based on a number of technologies, but mostly Watson technologies. And it's a tagging service, and you give it a URL, and it navigates to the URL and sucks out all the text on the page, and then says, okay, based on an analysis of the keywords on that page and which ones are most important, it looks into our sort of relationship management system, our ontology management system, and says, okay, here's a list of all the keywords. Here's how we're mapping those up to topics in the taxonomy, which are sort of more rigidly controlled. We've got maybe 100 or so values in the topic taxonomy. That's relating out to like 30,000 or so different keywords. So we've mapped the 30,000 or so keywords down to the 100 or so topics. And the tagging service is sort of looking through the keywords and figuring out which are important and mapping that up to the topic taxonomy. And then it basically feeds back, here are the topic tags that are relevant. And then that same tagging service, once you add more information to the model, like if you just got keywords and topics in your model, that's what it can do. If you add audience information and you add industry information and you add other kinds of value lists and draw lines between them in your ontology system, that tagging service can basically make even more inferences and start saying, okay, this is the topic, and also this is the industry, or this is the topic and industry, and also this is the intended audience. And it's doing that by looking for keywords or clues, as well as relationships between values. So a given topic that it's about gives you a clue about the potential audience. Other sort of clues in the language that aren't topic specific might also give you a clue what audience you're looking at or what industry it's relevant to. And so what we do when we run that service is basically have a database that says for every URL, here's the associated tag. And then we're flushing from that database the information into the tools that need it to surface what content already exists or measure performance of the content.
Referring to Haley's question of, do you have any suggestions? She said topic or general.
Okay. Yeah, the slideshare I mentioned actually was a workshop on creating a keyword ontology. So almost, but not quite a topic, a topic taxonomy. And it has some specific recommendations and also some specific technology that you could start with. But generally speaking, and I'm remembering this from the workshop, you start by looking at you can start by looking at what are people looking for on your site. What do you think are the important words that they should be looking for, and what are they actually looking for? And then looking at the pages that that they're finding, what other topics are on that same pages, and how do those how do they relate? And so it's a combination of looking at what people are searching for and looking at what they're finding and what other sort of relationships are implied by the content that's already there, and then sort of drawing lines between those keywords and saying, okay, so these keywords are clustering, these keywords are related, these keywords are really just synonyms, or different aspects or views of the same thing. And a lot of that is human effort. You're looking at the data, which is what people are looking at, what stuff is on the page, and there's technology that can help you get that data and understand it. But there's a lot of human effort just in turning that list of words into a taxonomy of topics and a set of relationships with keywords. And that really is, I think, just a matter of, I shouldn't say just, it's a matter of understanding the content well enough to decide when something is a synonym versus a relationship, when something is a higher level concept versus a more detailed concept, and just building it out that way. And I think if you've got a relatively small scope of content, you can probably do it relatively easily. If you've got a lot of, the larger the scope, the more important the automation becomes. But honestly, a lot of our initial work was done manually across a ton of keywords, just with some dedicated smart people who sort of crunch through the content and crunch through the data and turn that into something that we can use at an abstract enough level to be useful for reporting and understanding. And actually, a quick shout out to the current owner of the topic taxonomy, Mayo Takeuchi, who's on my team, and she's sort of currently going through the efforts of effectively rerunning the whole exercise to revalidate and adjust the taxonomy as necessary, and the ontology as necessary, based on how search trends and search data are changing. To take a different tack on the question, sort of from a general perspective, what we try to do is, for any taxonomy, is partner with a few sort of subject matter experts up front and build something fast and validate sort of, closely and directly with them and co-build it with them, and then roll it out more broadly and validate more broadly. But don't try and sort of boil the ocean. Wait for the tide to run out and boil a tide pool or two, and then man, now I'm feeling sorry for the creatures in the tide pool. I need to find a better analogy. But I think the important thing is not to get sort of overwhelmed by the scope and not to form a governance model too quickly. Start by piloting with some sort of informed subject matter experts who are, invested in managing these taxonomies and having them, as a tool for understanding their content, and co-create it with them, and then validate and extend. And yeah, I think that would be my big thing. Any
Uh,
other questions?
yep.
Or did that answer the question?
Two more questions. How do you overcome leadership lethargy when all they care about is generating leads?
Yeah. Um, well, I think one part of it is to make it really clear that you're not gonna that you can tie this to revenue. So um, if the only thing you're looking at is what's the last thing they clicked on before they generated the lead, then you know all you're going to care about are the product pages or the demo pages, and you're not going to get any awareness of the stuff that led them to those pages. So if you want to increase the number of leads, you got to optimize your customer journey and attract people at the appropriate stage and guide them through. So one of I you know I think it is ultimately about generating leads and generating revenue. Ideally, it's, putting on the sort of my enterprise hat. Ideally, it doesn't stop there either. You want to keep tracking them and keep helping them, past the purchase point. At least in IBM's case, where we got, technology as a service in many cases, and cloud products. It's not we don't have fire and forget products. We have support and an ongoing relationship with our customers. But just if all people are focused on leads, then give them, tell them this is going to generate more leads, because I genuinely believe it will. If you can create higher quality content that leads people more efficiently through the journey and doesn't sort of bump them back to Google, where they every time someone tries to sort of jump from one piece of content to the next, if you're not connecting it for them, they're going to go back to Google and search again, and there's a high chance you'll lose them to a competitor, or just they won't find the piece of content they're looking for. So taxonomy-based navigation and analytics is about understanding what people are finding and not finding on your site so that you can generate more revenue for them. And I hope that argument works. It's the one we're trying.
And last question. One key you mentioned was understanding the user and their actions and stage of viewing. How are you overcoming this? How are you overcoming the GDPR restrictions for this purpose?
Right. So I think there's a couple of things we can do. I mean, first off, we can be transparent about the fact that we're collecting data on our site about their behavior on our site. And, I don't think that's a terrible thing to ask people for permission for. And I mean, it has to be opt-in to a cookie. And then, but I mean, that said, it should also then be opt-in to signed-in status. We want people to sign into the website and get advantage from signing into the website, like notifications for topics they're interested in and things like that. But I think of I'm kind of a fan of GDPR in the sense that I think it made everyone think much more carefully about the information they're collecting and sharing. But this is information that we're talking about collecting for people on our site, not sharing it with anyone else, and it's to help them. So it really, the way I view it is like when you're collecting data on people, it can be creepy or it can be courteous depending on the context. Like if you approach somebody in the supermarket and say, "Hey, Karen, how's it going? How are your kids?" and they don't know you, that is creepy. That is downright creepy. But if Karen is in your house and she came because you're having a party and you invited Karen and you say, "Hey, Karen, how's it going? How are the kids?" That's courteous. You remembered her name. You remembered she has kids. And the way I view it is when someone's on your website and they're looking at your stuff, it's courteous to remember who they are and what they're interested in. If you start sharing that information with third parties and they start seeing sort of, their information being shared all over the web, that gets downright creepy. And I absolutely, that, yeesh. So I think GDPR is a good thing in the sense that it's made people think about this, but I don't think it stops us from being honest and straightforward and having a good relationship with our customers as long as we are honest and straightforward about it. And I think we can be with this and should be. I hope that answered the question.
It does.
Oh, good.
That is all of the questions. If you have nothing else, that concludes this beautiful webinar. You can use Team Priestley to get $100 off your LavaCon registration. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.